Oh, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry for the little bit of a late start. Had a little bit of a technical difficulty with the link to the software. So, wanted to welcome everyone today and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to spend a little bit of time with us and participating in this town hall. Today, we're going to be focusing on seasonal services. So a few ground rules moving forward through the presentation. Throughout the presentation and at the end of the presentation, there will be times that we will take questions. But throughout the presentation, as things come to your mind that you would like to ask, please visit the INDOT Facebook or Twitter page, and we will be filtering questions out of there live to ask the presenters today. And then if there's any questions that aren't specific to the two topics we're talking about today, which will be winter operations and vegetation management, please go visit either the website or call the phone number for the INDOT for you at the bottom of this slide. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you have there. But today we want to try to stay on topic for these two specific topics. So who are we? We are the INDOT Highway Maintenance Team. My name is Justin Berger, and I have been with the agency for 10 years, and I manage this team. 4 years I spent in project supervision, and then 6 years operating in operations management. My team specifically is responsible to build and manage INDOT maintenance processes, standard operating procedures, and policies to increase our level of service in roadway maintenance through innovation and best practices. I brought a few members of my team today to talk specifically to these topics that are on hand. First, I want to take some time to introduce Jeremy McGuffey. Jeremy McGuffey has been with the agency for 7 years. Hey, Jeremy. He started his career as an operations manager, which has yielded valuable field experience in it. He has since then moved up within the agency to INDOT's statewide winter operations manager. He's developed a lot of relationships in this field, became part of many committees, some of which are the AASHTO Cyclops Committee, the TRB Winter Maintenance Committee. He's part of two pooled fund studies that are Clear Roads and the NDSS, and he is also part of the stakeholder team for the Federal Highway Road Weathers. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. The other member of the team that I'd like to introduce today, we'll be talking about vegetation management, is Matt Krauscher. Matt Krauscher is our roadside maintenance specialist. So good morning, Matt.
Morning.
Matt attended Purdue University. For his sake, we'll shout out a boiler up. He earned his bachelor's degree in wildlife biology and a minor in fisheries and aquatic science. He then went on to get his master's degree in restoration ecology. While at Purdue, Matt served as a habitat specialist for cooperative extensive services for the Department of Forestry and National Researches. Matt then went on to serve as a biological field stations manager for the Wichita State University, where he managed more than 3,500 acres. Matt then came to INDOT in April of 2017, and we were glad to be able to get that experience onto our side, where he has served since then as a road maintenance specialist, in that he provides both technical support and training to INDOT staff and others on how exactly we should manage the roadside vegetation. So thank you for joining us, Matt. To begin the presentation, we're going to kick it over to Jeremy, and he will go through the beginning of our winter operations slides.
Introduction, Justin. Again, thank you for the introduction, Justin, and thank all of you for being here and tuning in today, even if it's just for a few minutes. Hopefully, we'll be able to provide you with some good information here. I'm going to be talking about INDOT winter operations, and specifically to this season, give you some updates as to where the program's at and, some changes that we've implemented, and also to give you some tools that hopefully you can go home and start using today. Next slide. So just a quick outline. So the first thing I want to cover is the tools for the job. What does INDOT use out there on the roadways? This is going to cover all of our plows, the weather information, some of those decision-making tools. And then the next one there is the road weather information system. We call it RWIS. So you might hear me use both throughout the presentation. Just know RWIS means road weather information system. Lastly, I'm going to cover the TrafficWise program, or 511. We made some recent updates to the program, so I'll be happy to share those with you today. And actually, if you're tuning in, you'll probably be one of the first people in the state to use the new program. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide. All right, so tools for the job. Let's jump right into there. Next slide. Snowplows. So a lot of these slides are actually going to cover common questions that I get from people a lot, whether it's friends and family or people from the public that are reaching out to understand our operations better. So the first one here: how many snowplows does INDOT actually have? So that's a good question. INDOT maintains a fleet of nearly 1,100 snowplows. These are all dump trucks. They're all equipped with front plows and spreaders, similar to the one that you see there on the right. Some trucks actually do have side plows and belly plows equipped as well, and that helps them to remove snow more efficiently and to remove a little bit more snow. Lastly, INDOT even has a fleet of 29 tow plows, which is a single truck that has a pull behind plow and the front plow, of course, and that truck is designed to remove 2 lanes worth of snow at a time. You might see these out particularly more in the northwest of Indiana, but we do have quite a few of them scattered around the state. So where are they? INDOT has around 100 maintenance locations and garages. The trucks are scattered pretty strategically around the state at these garages. And they're all located in areas that they'd be responsible for both the highway maintenance and the snow removal as well. So what are they responsible for? So these 1,100 trucks that I mentioned, they're responsible for clearing snow from approximately 30,000 lane miles of state highway. That's not just the state highway, that's any US routes or interstate routes as well. We're responsible for all of those. Something that we do not plow or even maintain are the county highways and city streets. We seem to get a lot of questions on those in the wintertime as to when we're going to be out there. Those questions would go towards the local agencies. So how long is a typical snow route? Snow routes can vary, but generally they're around 30 miles for that entire route. And the time to completion can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on a variety of factors. One of the big ones is going to be, how rural is that route? Does the driver have to drive a little bit further to reach that route before they can even begin? Next slide. De-icer materials. This is also a common category that we get questions from, so hopefully I can address some of them. Which de-icers does INDOT use? So the common ones are salt and salt brine. INDOT, these materials are the most common. They're easy to get, and we have them actually located at all of those 100 maintenance facilities that I mentioned earlier. So why do we use these de-icers? That's also a good question. Salt and salt brine, as I mentioned, are relatively cheap. They're low cost, but they're also high impact. They can they do the job well, and they've done it well for decades now. There are a number of alternatives on the market, but oftentimes they are significantly more expensive without significantly improving performance. Now we do stock a couple of these alternatives in a few locations. Particularly when we get a case of extreme cold weather, and those can be useful in those situations. Why doesn't INDOT apply brine when it's not snowing? So applying brine before a storm is called pre-treating or anti-icing. You may see the trucks out there, the road surface may be dry, and you may see them out there applying this brine material out there on a sunny day. The whole purpose of it is similar to like waxing your car. You want to create that barrier with the salt so that that first hour of snowfall or ice on the roadway doesn't stick to the road surface. So that's why I use that analogy a lot. It's very similar to waxing your car because you're trying to keep the road free of that snow and ice for the first bit of the storm. Next slide. Okay, so weather resources. So what weather tools does INDOT have? That's a good question. One of the primary tools that INDOT uses is called MDSS, or Maintenance Decision Support System. INDOT's been using this since the early 2000s. We were actually one of the pioneers of this system. Now it's being used by about a dozen states around the US. What MDSS does is it provides a more route-specific or road-level forecast, whereas from the AccuWeather or the news station, you may see just an atmospheric forecast. So they take that weather impact that we're receiving from the National Weather Service and AccuWeather and all of those, and they apply it to the road surface to tell us exactly, what we can expect to see on the roads. Is INDOT partnered with the National Weather Service? And that's a big yes, we are. In fact, we've actually developed a great relationship with them. This year, the National Weather Service and INDOT will be kicking off a program hosted by the Federal Highway Administration called Pathfinder. One of the primary goals of Pathfinder is to provide more consistent and standardized messaging to the public. So we're going to be working with the National Weather Service very closely as this winter comes through. And, we're going to marry up our messages, and you should see a lot more messages with both of our logos on it, similar to what I put on the bottom of the slide there. How does INDOT track weather impacts to roadways? So INDOT has a couple of methods to track weather impacts on the roadways, especially in real time. So the road weather information system that I'm going to be talking about here in a little bit, those are stations with actual weather sensors on them that track weather in real time and provide us both atmospheric and road level conditions. We also have drivers and supervisors that are driving the roads, constantly during the storm, and they're radioing back to the office to provide, that real-time road condition status to the teams. So those are two very important ways that we can get that data in real time and adjust our operations. Next slide.
Okay, with that, Jeremy, thank you for the content. We're going to take a little break here in the middle of Jeremy's presentation to filter out any questions that you might have, as well as to remind you where you can post those questions at. So let's see what we've got so far. So Beth asked, please explain the preferred procedures for town plowing across state roads. We usually keep blades down when crossing the intersections.
So I don't think there's a preferred procedure. I think that we should all be wary of what the other is doing at all times, whether it's the plowing or the applying of materials. I will say from personal experience that, whenever I was down south managing operations in southern Indiana, we actually crossed state lines quite a bit and worked with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and we communicated these things with each other in advance. So I think that's the most important piece, is partnering with whoever your local INDOT contact is, and having those discussions ahead of time.
Thank you, Jeremy. So another question came from Bernard, and that is, these chemical-based de-icers, do they have a negative effect on the pavement?
So I guess it depends on which ones you're talking about. The salt and the salt brine do not, and I think that's a negative misconception that a lot of people have. Salt and salt brine do not. They actually wash through. They go into the groundwater very quickly. There are materials that do have negative impacts, and we've stopped using those. We actually used them very little beforehand, but we do not use them now. One of which is called magnesium chloride. Magnesium chloride actually has been found in studies to cause distress to concrete pavement. And we've tested that here at INDOT's materials laboratories, and several other labs across the US has tested that as well. Good question.
Thanks, Jeremy. So one more from Beth is, Huntertown has received complaints that motorists at State Road 3 intersections, when the snow is piled along the berm, complaints state that visibility is poor. Who should we contact when these complaints arrive?
Yeah, so that is a great question as well. So I would start off with building that contact locally. So the number that you actually see on the screen there, the 1855 INDOT4U, that's going to be one of the quickest ways that you can get information to us. That is our customer service line. They can actually forward that to our traffic management center or directly to the supervisors in that area, so that you can get actions taken quickly.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. I think we had one more question. So the question is, why don't you use more salt to melt the snow and ice quicker?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a little bit of a science behind it that I don't think too many people are aware of. But so there is a limit to how much salt can be applied before it stops working and begins to have those negative effects. The scientific term that we tend to throw around is called supersaturation. And this isn't just limited to de-icers, but that occurs when the solution, and in this case it's the water on the roadway, it's holding more salt, or it contains more salt than it can hold. And this can actually result in crystallization and rapid refreezing. So yeah, great question.
All right, well, that's all the questions for the midway point. So we'll go back to Jeremy. And remember, if you have questions, just continue to post them through Facebook or Twitter. Jeremy?
All right, thanks, Justin. Yeah, good questions, everybody. So the first half of the presentation was more just introducing you to our operation itself. The second half here with road weather information system and the 511, I want to be able to provide you guys some tools that you can use. Like I said, you can take it back today and start using these tools daily. So the first one here is our road weather information system. These are towers that we have installed around the state. You've probably seen them driving along the highway. They actually contain a suite of multiple weather sensors, precip sensor to measure, the type and the intensity of the precipitation, wind sensors, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, radiation detectors, all kinds of cool stuff located on these towers that help us with our operations. We have 52 of those fixed sites, similar to what you see on the right-hand side there. We also, in addition to that, have 13 mobile RWIS devices. These are installed on our dump truck fleet and a couple of supervisor vehicles. And these are constantly out on the roadway picking up measurements in real time on the road surface. All of this information is actually viewable by the public at rwis.indot.in.gov. And you can Google this too, just INDOT RWIS if you're having trouble finding it. Next slide. So this is kind of visually, if you ever see these, this is what you're looking at. That tower on the left there is one of those weather stations that we have. Again, we have 52 of them, but they're all in common areas, so you should see one at least, in your drive around the state. And then on the right-hand side there is our mobile devices. I had to highlight it in red because it can be kind of difficult to spot. That sensor is actually aimed down at the pavement and collects data on the pavement surface itself, like friction values, what type of precip is on the roadway, whether it's ice, water, dry, whatever. It's collecting all that data in real time and mapping out the road essentially. Next slide. So if you do go to the RWIS website that I mentioned just a little bit ago, this is kind of that home screen that you'll see. This is a map of all of the stations that we have. And if the mobile devices are deployed at that time, you'll see those on the map as well. So you can click on any of those sites and it'll pull up a quick snapshot of the data that that device is pulling at that time. As you can see, I have Indianapolis at I-74 and I-465. That device is pulling data right here. So next slide. And then there's also another view. So on that home screen, if you select table, this will pull up all the devices in kind of a table view to make it a little bit easier to find everything for a region. So as you can see at the top there, Crawfordsville, you have multiple sites that are located within the Crawfordsville INDOT district. And you can quickly find information for your area and compare it to information that's coming from nearby sites as well to see if there's a storm in only attacking a specific part of the state, or just to compare and contrast conditions. Next slide. And then further, you can drill down by selecting any of those individual sites and pull up a dashboard that allows you to view individual weather parameters. There's also cameras installed on these sites that can provide you a good deal of verification as to what's going on out there. If the precip sensor is picking up that it's raining and it's a heavy intensity, then you should be able to see that on the camera. So I think these are a very useful tool if you're weather savvy or you're interested in understanding what's going on out on the roadway in real time. All right. So the next item I wanted to touch on was our TrafficWise or 511 program. We recently went through an update on this, so I'm kind of excited that you guys get to be the first to see it. Next slide. So with that said, the two biggest changes, if you've been on our 511 before, it actually used to be called CARS program, but now we've changed the name to TrafficWise. The biggest changes are going to be the graphical user interface. It's much more modernized, it's easier to use, it flows better. The second biggest one is the plow tracker feature. And it's very cool because, you know, we're not the first state to implement this feature, but there's a lot of good stuff that can be gained from you know, allowing everybody else to see this plow information. So all of this is viewable at the 511in.org link there I have on the screen. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the new 511. Again, you can go here right now and start using this. We just made it live this week. On the left-hand side there, you have a geographic snapshot of what's going on in a specific area. So in this case, I selected one of the incidents downtown. I think it was a road closure, and it pulled up everything that was nearby. And I think that's a huge improvement over the previous system, because you can actually see if there's anything else nearby that's affecting, you know, that road closure or high water event, whatever. So I'll also talk about the plow tracker itself. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a layer selection. The orange and blue, you can barely see them. The orange and blue that I don't have highlighted, those are the plow tracker icons. And there's also a number of other icons that aren't just winter specific that you can use throughout the year. Next slide. So there you have it. I actually have it highlighted there where I selected those. So as you can see, there's two different colored icons. I've had a couple of questions about that. It actually came down to how we installed our telematics on our trucks. The orange icons represent older trucks in our fleet that are due for replacement in the next few years. Those ones don't have the full suite of sensors and the dash cam. It's just a basic GPS unit. And then the blue trucks are the more advanced ones that are connected to everything in the truck. They're also pulling that dash cam image. The super cool thing about that is we do have quite a few of those blue trucks in the state. So if we get into a large winter event, you're actually going to see, you know, a huge amount of those trucks deployed across the state. You can get a good idea of what's happening out there. Next slide. So I also selected one of those trucks just so I could give you a snapshot. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you talk to, it's not snowing yet. So you just get to see rain here from the day that I pulled the information. These will be available year round, or at least that's, you know, the intent right now. So if you do want to use it, you can begin using it today to understand what's going on out there in the roadways. I do want to make this available to everyone. It's important to us that everybody can start using this and see this plow tracker data, because it helps you make more informed decisions before you leave your house for your commute, or, you know, take your kids to school. You can get on there and actually see what's happening on the roadway, especially in your own area. Like I said, we have 1,100 snow trucks, so chances are you're going to find a truck that's near your house at the time that you're looking, and be able to make those smart decisions. I really want to get people using this so that you know, we can make those more informed decisions. Next slide. Yeah, so that's about it from me. I really appreciate you guys participating in this. If you want to learn more about my program, you can go to indotwinterops.com. If for some reason you're having trouble finding it, you could simply Google INDOT Winter Ops. If you do have suggestions or innovations or just general questions, feel free to reach out to our customer service line, and they'll get you in contact with me or somebody on the team. They can be reached at 855-INDOT for you. That number is there on the screen. All right.
All right, well, thank you, Jeremy. We'll see if we have any questions during that segment. So I got one question that says, I know other states have cameras on plow trucks. Does INDOT plan to have those on all of their trucks?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have two different systems right now, and it has to do with the age of some of the fleet. Eventually, over the next, I think it's about 2 years, 2.5 years, we will have all of our trucks installed with cameras. So you will see only blue icons on that map.
All right. Well, thank you. That is all the current questions we have. So thank you for your time. And with that, we are going to, oh, wait a minute. We just had one puck up. I'm sorry. Why are trucks driving with their plows up during a snowstorm?
Great timing. Yeah, and great question. So there's a couple of answers to this. So the first one is plows aren't really designed to remove all the snow off of the surface of a road. I mean, if they were designed to do that, then obviously roads would be clear, every day all year round, and also we would be replacing a lot of plow blades. They remove about 90% of the snow and ice off the road surface, and then the rest of it's left up to de-icers like the salt and the salt brine that I mentioned. The second reason is because a driver may have just treated that area with salt or salt brine, and they really don't want to plow that right back off the roadway. They want to give it a chance to work. And I think I'd mentioned this earlier. It may take some time for that salt to work, especially in extreme cold conditions. At about 15 degrees, it may take up to an hour for salt to melt that snow and that ice off the last bit of roadway there. So yeah, really good question.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. So that's going to conclude the winter operations portion of the presentation. Jeremy is going to be sticking around to the end of the town hall meeting here to answer any questions that may come to your mind throughout the next presentation. So with that, we're going to transition over to herbicide and vegetation management with Mr. Croucher.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. And Jeremy, that was an excellent overview of our winter operations. And, we're getting ready to go into the winter operations, but next spring, hopefully some of the information that I'll be covering is going to be able to come to mind when you see what's going on in our right of way. So I'm going to focus on our vegetation management portion of roadside maintenance within our state right of way today. So in 2014, the Indiana Department of Transportation modified their vegetation management program to bring in the idea of an integrated vegetation management plan, which is a detailed document that describes very specifically what vegetation management is done where within the right-of-way, and then also how that work is to be done. But part of that document focuses on the main objectives associated with vegetation management within the right-of-way. And the screen here is displaying some of those pieces. And the couple that I really want to draw attention to is the idea of enhancing safety of the traveling public. So that's first and foremost in our overall objectives. We also want to comply with state laws and regulations and enhance environmental protection through the actions and the activities that we do and what work that we are doing there. And then we also want to promote the coordination and efficiency of other maintenance activities that may occur within the right-of-way, such as ditch maintenance, for instance, or inspection of a bridge structure. And then lastly, we also want to try to promote and preserve native wildlife habitats in the flora that exist throughout the state. And again, though, that focus is primarily centered on the safety associated with the motoring public. So there's a lot of folks that have the interest in the idea that vegetation within the right-of-way should be manicured and very well kempt, akin to a golf course. And clearly this is not one of our roads. This is going through the middle of a golf course, but depicting the idea of the want, right? Something that's been lawn mowed and regularly maintained and landscaped and really pruned up. And this can be a very expensive endeavor to be able to do and really goes beyond potentially what those objectives are. However, as I mentioned, the idea of safety and the need to do something, and this is an example of a location pulling through a median or at an intersection where the vegetation is growing to a height that's actually impeding sight distance at that intersection and thereby posing a potential risk for that motorist, both the person in the vehicle looking out to make that decision to pull into the roadway, as well as those that are traveling down the roadway. And so this is something that the primary focus for what it is that we do is the need to manage that space. On the flip side of that, we may not have a sight distance issue, as you see in the photo here, where the cool season grasses are free of broadleaf weeds and are really looking, at least in my opinion, pretty clean and nice. And we can see plenty far down the road here on this entrance ramp onto the interstate system. However, that cool season grass that you're seeing there has reached its maturity. It's produced its seed head. It's now about 3 feet in height, and there's a want that we need to mow, or that we want to mow that space to be able to have that manicured looker to clean things up. And we do this, there's going to be a mowing that's occurred here because of some aesthetics reasons, to try to knock down that seed head to provide a good line of sight and be able to have that space looking like it's being maintained and managing it all the same. So on the flip side of that, our warm season grasses, later on in the year. So that earlier photo was actually from sometime in the early summer stages. And then this photo is actually being taken later on in the year with warm season grasses like this big blue stem that's actually impeding sight distance in this particular location, requiring some form of vegetation management, most likely the control using a mechanical treatment. So the need exists to be able to manage appropriately the vegetation in the right of way, depending on where you are, to be economical and efficient with resources that we have. There's actually a great deal of land that's out there that may look like it needs to have something done with it, but I'm hopefully going to shine some light on why we do what we do, moving through the best management practices that are done. So I know you're here to talk about or to hear about the vegetation management within the roadside, but I wanted to be able to demonstrate something that maybe shines a little bit more light on the idea of zonal maintenance. And the electrical utility right of way is a perfect location, at least for me, to be able to think about the idea of a zone type of an approach. There is in vegetation management within a utility corridor, an overhead utility corridor, there's the idea of a wire zone and border zone. The vegetation that's allowed to grow within the wire zone is very different from the vegetation that can grow in the border zone. And this has to do with the potential to impact those conductors that are carrying the electricity through that space. Obviously, we can't have trees growing too close to those conductors in the event that there's a storm or some kind of an event that causes that tree to come in contact with the conductor. And so the closer you are to the wires, the less you are able to keep taller vegetation in that space. And so the idea of compatible vegetation or compatible species changes depending on where you are within that right-of-way space. Similar to the electrical utility corridor, the Federal Highway Administration has a publication out about zonal maintenance and the idea of integrated vegetation management. And this diagram is really calling out the idea that there can be a number of different zones. Some states may have 3 zones, some states may have 5 or more zones, and they're all dependent upon what the objectives are within that space. I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but the idea being here is that each of the zones that are being called out have a different objective. That's why they're indicated or separated by a different zone, and they're going to be managed differently based on the need associated with that particular spot with an objective. For instance, to ensure surface drainage immediately adjacent to the road, or if you get a little bit further off, you may need to keep obstructions like a tree or other obstructions clear in that particular space. And so it may be the operational zone, for instance. So we have a handful of tools available to us to manage vegetation within the right-of-way. And this is the idea of integrated pest management, or IPM, if you're familiar with other forms of management for pests. But when we get into the specifics associated with vegetation, we coined the term integrated vegetation management, or IVM. In that, we have a number of different tools. We have the idea of chemical or the use of some form of an herbicide. We have the mechanical tool, so whether that's using a chainsaw or a forestry mulcher or a mower to be able to mow the vegetation and shorten that vegetation down. We also have, and I'm going to skip over the next one, but in the idea of biological control agents, and there's some insect pests that can be released, not something that INDOT does specifically, but has been done in the Midwest for the control of purple loosestrife, for example, or some other thistles in the western states. This is certainly something that can be done, though our resources here are relatively limited. I have an asterisk next to the idea of competition, and I in the natural form of vegetation management options. And the reason for that is the idea that through the use of some of our other control options, so the chemical and the mechanical, we can actually promote desirable vegetation, which are actually going to be used as a tool to compete against undesirable or incompatible vegetation within the right of way. I'll try to touch on that a little bit more as we move forward. So similar to the Federal Highway Administration, we have a diagram here. This is INDOT's current diagram associated with our zones that we have. We have the vegetation-free zone, or zone 1. We have an operational or clear zone in zone 2. And then we have a selective zone in zone 3. And you can learn more information about this at greenercrossroads.com. There's some other details associated with that. But for the purposes of today's presentation here, I wanted to discuss some key points. One is that we are going to mow 15 feet along the edge of every shoulder, with the exception of a couple of locations. One of those being that of intersections, where we'll mow a sight distance triangle that's going to expand beyond 15 feet. So at a county road, for instance, that space is going to be mowed out to ensure that the motorists at that intersection are able to see both directions down the right of way. And then in medians that are less than 60 feet in width, so on the interstate or maybe a US route that's got a divided vegetated median, that space is going to be mowed in full width as well. Another point where we're using some mechanical clearing is that of invasive brush species that are growing most of the time within that selective zone or beyond that space, where we'll use a forestry mulcher or some other form of mechanical removal of that woody vegetation. So one of the challenges with utilizing mechanical control, just like mowing your yard, right? You go out and you mow it, and the vegetation grows right back. And there's some cadence that's required to be able to maintain that height and keep it at a desirable state. It's a little bit tricky when it comes to woody vegetation that we have, that especially the invasive species that we have growing within our right of way. And an example that I have here is from some work that I used to do when I worked at Purdue University, where we utilized a forestry mulcher to mow down some woody vegetation. That photo on the upper left-hand corner was mowed in October of one year. So the space in the foreground was woody vegetation that was mowed down. It looked a lot like what was in the back half of that particular photo. You can see that wooden board in the front there is about 3 feet in height. So we mowed it down to the ground. Nothing really standing up. Approximately 1 year later, a photo was taken of that exact same location in the lower right-hand side. And you can see that vegetation regrows very aggressively and very, very rapidly to fill that space back up. You might be able to see a board in the middle of that. It's not that same 3-foot board that's in the other photo, but rather that board is 6 feet in height. So you can see in approximately 1 year of growing season, that woody vegetation is able to regain about half of its original height in just one growing season, requiring some other treatments to be able to be effective. So an example of that, trying to utilize data to drive some of our decisions as it relates to vegetation management. And this is something that we take pretty seriously in evaluating what it is that we do to make modifications and changes to our overall vegetation management program. But these are some numbers associated with some research that I did in cooperation with INDOT back in the early 2000s. And there's a lot of information going on here, but we're displaying the idea that the percent of broadleaf cover, or the amount of broadleaf weeds that are within the vegetation in an area through time. And so what you see in the blue and black bars there is the idea of a mowing treatment versus an untreated control. So in one instance, we're actually mowing that grass and tracking the impact that it has on broadleaf weed cover versus doing nothing whatsoever. And what you'll see is that through time, there really is no difference between the amount of broadleaf weeds that are present within an area that's been mowed or has been totally left alone. The presence remains the same. However, if you introduce a selective herbicide treatment into that same space, you're actually able to take that percent cover from 13 or 14% and move it all the way down into 1 or 2%. And what's really to note here is that even 1 year later, after that initial herbicide application, that percent cover is going to remain the same.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. We will continue on with Matt's presentation in a second. We just want to take a break here in the middle to answer some questions that we've got in. It looks like we have 2 so far. One question is, do you have to use herbicide?
Justin, that's a great question. And I think I've been alluding to that a little bit as we've been talking through this, is that it's one of the tools that we have in our toolbox, right? So it is something that we can utilize to be able to control certain species. There's a number of things that of species that are out there that mechanically cutting them off. If you were to take a Canada thistle plant, for example, you can mow that particular plant or that species off 7 or more times in a year, and that Canada thistle plant is going to stay present and is going to be there forever. And so if we truly want to remove that from the system because it's a state noxious weed, we do need to utilize some form of a different control method, and herbicides are one of those effective tools.
All right, thank you, Matt. One more question. Where can I go or who can I talk to if I'm trying to identify whether or not a plant is invasive?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So actually, there's an invasive species council for the state of Indiana. It's a kind of a little known fact that it's present out there. So the Indiana Invasive Species Council is officially what it is, the IISC, and this is a governor's council that was established to be able to review and evaluate invasive species. And there's actually a master list associated with that, the official Indiana state list of invasive species. And you're able to look that up. If you're trying to identify a species specifically, I recommend reaching out to the Cooperative Extension Program in your local county to be able to submit some photos, and they can probably find the right resource to be able to help you with that.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Again, we'll take some more questions at the end of Matt's presentation. So with that, back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Justin. So talking a little bit more about the herbicide component of our overall program. So we talked a little bit about the idea of mowing that first 15 feet and using mechanical treatments to be able to control woody vegetation, for example. But we do utilize herbicides as part of our overall control program, and really in two different major aspects. One is the first 30 feet, as right-of-way allows, is receiving a selective broadleaf weed treatment. And we do that for two reasons. One, to help us reduce the need to mow beyond that 15 feet by reducing that potentially taller broadleaf weed vegetation that may grow in that space, to ensure that we're able to maintain that line of sight. And then also to try to reduce the potential for spread of invasive and noxious weed species that may occur either by the mowers moving those seeds through the right of way, or potentially even from wind moving those from the motorists that are driving down that particular space. By maintaining a good solid stand of grassy-like vegetation in that close space to the roadway, we're also improving our overall surface drainage associated with what's present there. Beyond that clear zone, or that operational zone that we have, we do focus primarily on utilizing spot treatments, and that's going to be trying to target individual plants or smaller populations. It's not mile by mile down the roadway like we do with the selective treatment, because we're trying to target isolated populations. And so what some of this looks like, and you'll maybe see some of this when you're out and about, especially during the earlier summer portions of the year, where a broadcast application truck is out making applications to that operational zone to try to control broadleaf weeds within that space. There's a number of different ways that these trucks can be utilized. Some of these nozzles can be turned on and off and be used for some other treatments, but this is a pretty common scene that you'll see for a selective broadleaf weed control, requiring some traffic control. These trucks are moving approximately 12 miles an hour down the road, making that treatment. They're shutting those nozzles off every time they get to a landscaped or a maintained yard, bodies of water, any other special feature that may be present within the right-of-way. And the applicators are required to follow the label associated with that pesticide, and there may be some additional restrictions associated with that, and we take that very seriously. The one thing that I do commonly get questions about is this material safe? And I will make the statement here that INDOT does its best to try to use the herbicide products that are most environmentally friendly and safe, as well as are safe for for humans and for wildlife. And so there's sometimes some concerns about maybe pets that may enter that space, or wildlife, or even pedestrians potentially. And the majority of the products that we have, in fact, all the products that we have, really the restriction reentry period associated with that is waiting until the spray is dried. Obviously, we can't restrict a white-tailed deer or a turkey from moving through that space right after that truck drives through, but certainly there's a pretty low potential for toxicity from that just acute exposure. Other methods that we use, I talked about the broadcast treatments, now talking about the spot treatments associated with things. And this is where we really can make a lot of ground for targeting those incompatible species or very spot specific locations. Not all the vegetation growing within the right of way needs management. A lot of it is actually very, very good, and we want to try to promote that. But when we have invasive species growing within a space, whether that's Phragmites australis or autumn olive or Callery pear, or even just some of the native tree species that may try to grow within the right of way in that selective zone, we still need to try to maintain and control some of those species. And so spot treatments through the use of a backpack sprayer, or maybe a UTV, or a tractor mounted sprayer with a handgun or a hose reel, or maybe even small operations where we do a small broadcast treatment in that particular space for a larger population is a good tool for us to be able to utilize. So this is a photo demonstrating kind of the perfect example of what it is that we're shooting for. I realize that not every mile of every road looks like this, but I think it really describes, and you can really pick out the different zones associated with our vegetation management program. Starting on the right shoulder here of the roadway, you can see that about 15 feet was mowed down that space. And then the next 15 feet is just cool season grasses. It's relatively broadleaf weed free. That's a result of our herbicide treatments in that particular space, maintaining that in a weed-free manner. In my opinion, it looks pretty clean and pretty good, and it's not impacting any kind of sight distance. And so there's not a lot of reason to mow that space. Moving outside of the operational zone, we move into the selective zone, where you'll see in this particular case an area that's been planted to native wildflowers and native vegetation that's growing within that space naturally without even being planted. And this is relatively early in the design here, but there's not a whole lot of need to manage this space at this time, but there is the potential to move in and do some spot treatments if we have an invasive species or something that maybe moves into a spot. So going in and disturbing this spot with a mower on a regular basis is actually going to change that species complex to something that's potentially incompatible for us. So some of our biggest challenges that we have within the right-of-way actually are invasive species and noxious weeds. And I've talked quite a bit about that. And for those of you that are good with species identification, you'll see some Canada thistle, a state noxious weed in this particular photo, forming a dense monoculture associated with this space. And, this is, you can also see in this particular photo, one of those famous do not mow or spray signs, which was installed intentionally to be able to provide some protections for the landscape space that's behind that sign. The challenge being is that we have that sign kind of suggesting that there should not be much management, which is couldn't be farther from the truth. We still have the need to be able to manage that particular space. And so utilizing some form of vegetation management is virtually required in every acre of land along our right of way. It's just a function of how often and what tool are we going to be able to use to manage that space. So to try to wrap this up a little bit from my perspective here, some final thoughts. Vegetation management best practices, whether that be in the roadside right-of-way or in a utility right-of-way, really the big goal is to try to control the bad plants and promote the good plants. And that really means trying to focus on the idea of promoting a compatible vegetation community within a different zone based on your operational needs associated with that space. The further you are from the right-of-way, if we're 300 feet from the edge of the road, the native vegetation that would normally grow there, if that was a tree or maybe it's prairie or maybe it's a wetland, there's no real reason to modify that if that's something that's part of the right-of-way, but it's not going to impact the overall operation and safety of that roadway. So you guys can also be involved in this. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges that we have is actually invasive and noxious weed species that INDOT's never planted those species within our right-of-way. They found their way in some way, somehow, and they cause a lot of challenges to us. And there's a number of different ways that you can get involved. And one of those is that I can recommend to you is by joining your local cooperative invasive species management area, or CISMA for short. If you do some searching online for that, there's a lot of local grassroots efforts that are going on in an effort to be able to control these species at a local level, and that can certainly help the state right-of-way in maintaining that space better. Lastly, I can mention the idea that you need to work locally to promote and request native vegetation anytime that you have that opportunity. I mentioned those invasive species. Many of the problematic species that we have within the right-of-way are actually escapees from ornamental plantings, such as the Callery pear, or sometimes known as the Bradford pear. That species in particular may be one of our #1 woody vegetation that's impacting our right-of-way today, and it's going to be costing us millions of dollars to be able to try to control that particular species within the right-of-way. If you want to learn more about my program or our program here, greenercrossroads.com. There's some other facets of our program that include litter collection and a number of other things. And, we certainly welcome comments, whether that's negative or positive. We certainly like to have compliments come towards us that describe your interest in our program. And that can be entered in through the customer service portal, INDOT for you, or by calling 855 INDOT for you.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. We appreciate that. We will take any questions here at the end. We'll get Jeremy as well as Matt back on if we need. So Matt, it looks like we have one for you. There you are, Matt. So one question was asked is, why do we only mow twice per year?
Sure, and that's a great question. So it may appear that we only mow twice a year, and you heard me mention at the very beginning of that presentation a major focus on the idea of cool season grasses and warm season grasses. So on the majority of our roads, we do time our initial mowing to be able to control or reduce the height of the grass that's growing along the shoulder, and that's typically our cool season grasses that we're trying to capture after they've produced their seed head. And so that late May time frame is usually kind of the time. It varies from south to north, but that's for the cool season grasses. And then the warm season grasses are something that's going to come to maturity in August, September, October time frame, and we certainly time our second mowing for that. But on other roads, we actually have 3 mowing cycles on the rural interstates, for instance, and actually in the urban environments where we have a higher traffic count or have been deemed as important to the local communities. We actually mow many roads actually up to 5 times a year. And it may be challenging to see that because our contracted partners that we utilize for this is certainly something that they come in and they get out pretty quickly in a lot of spaces.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Let's see a couple more here. This one's going to be directed towards Jeremy. How much salt and brine does INDOT go through a typical year?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have the normal spreadsheets in front of me, but I will tell you that it is typically around 200,000 tons of salt.
Awesome. Thank you.
And when you figure in, just real quick, if you figure in the millions of miles that the plows travel throughout the year, it factors into very little per section of roadway.
Gotcha. So I think we got time for one more question, and this one's going to be directed for Jeremy as well. How do you how do you decide what type of plow to use on what road?
So we, like I mentioned earlier, all of our plows, all 1,100 of those plows are equipped with that front plow. The rest of them are completely optional. If that local garage or that local unit decides that they have additional needs, we can provide them that expertise to say, this would best fit your need in this area. As far as the tow plows go, we have 29 of those around the state. Those are the tow plows are the ones that clear 2 lanes at once. Those are more strategically placed, just because we're still kind of getting our footing and our with those, and we're learning what their capabilities are. But I would expect to see more of those out there on the highway as we progress a few more years.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. We had one more question come in. We'll try and squeeze in here real quick. So Matt, this one's going to be directed to you. Specifically, how can I get involved in roadside management with INDOT?
Yeah, so at least one good opportunity. Well, I'll talk about two opportunities. So one is actually to help us with our litter collection on our roadsides, especially our state routes. the Adopt a Highway program is an excellent opportunity for interested individuals to sign on, go through a briefing, safety briefing, and then be able to help us with litter collection on a dedicated roadside. In response for that, you can actually get a sign that is a recognition sign for your group name. If it's Matt and Justin's litter collection team, we can put that on a sign and collect litter a couple of times a year and get recognition for that. And that certainly helps our forces be able to focus on some other tasks that are associated with it. At a community level, one of the things that can certainly be done is we actually have a permitting process that allows for local municipalities to be able to have like a gateway into their community or at specific locations. And that's the public art and landscaping policy. Again, that's through the permits group. And there's a process that's involved with that, but it certainly allows for kind of a local signage or interest to be able to be installed that fit certain parameters that are closely looked at and reviewed for safety as well as for some other factors. But it's certainly a program that's really starting to take off. There's no funding that comes from INDOT for that, but it's certainly an opportunity for the locals to have a local spin on their environment.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so I want to take just a few minutes here to thank both Jeremy and Matt for taking some time out of their day to educate the public and to share some of the challenges that we have here at INDOT with some of these more seasonal specific tasks. Today's information has been recorded, and I want to make sure that you have access, or if you'd like to share this with others that you feel should have been on here and weren't able to for scheduling and other purposes. It will be found both on the INDOT Facebook page and our YouTube page, and you can share this content as after today. The other thing I wanted to do is just really thank everyone that took time out of the day to come on the call today. We appreciate and we encourage involvement from everyone, and not just on the call today, but moving forward as some of the contact points were mentioned today. And our desire as INDOT is to partner with the public as well as local officials as we attempt to build and maintain a superior transportation system. So again, we appreciate everyone's time today. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up this event for today, and everyone enjoy the rest of their day.